When young children begin to talk, it doesn't take too long for them to learn the word mine, right? I mean, put them together with other kids, a limited number of toys, and you are bound to hear that come out. And you know how it is, they claim ownership over whatever it is, a toy car, a ball, a doll, a set of blocks. And yet that doesn't stop other children from trying to take those things. And I mean, it's not like we teach them to behave that way, right? I mean, we train our children to share, but it's an uphill battle. I mean, even in those nursery disputes, I think we begin to grapple with some really big questions. I mean, is there something inherently wrong with ownership, with claiming something as yours? And if not, then how much is enough? Right? How much is too much? How should we acquire things? How should we respond when someone else doesn't have enough? What should be done if someone takes what is mine? And who has the right to decide all of these things? I mean, obviously those issues are central to political disputes that happen today, but I mean, they've been debated for millennia. And so it shouldn't surprise us that the Lord addresses those as he reveals his law to the people of Israel to establish them as a theocratic nation, a nation where he rules. In fact, as he applies the Ten Commandments to specific situations in what's called the Book of the Covenant, we've talked about it. It starts right after the Ten Commandments and goes through the end of chapter 23 in Exodus. The Lord devotes more space to this subject than to any other. And yet his message is summed up in the simplest of terms in the Eighth Commandment. It simply says, "You shall not steal." So to unpack this commandment, we'll follow the same structure we have with the others. We'll look first at the limitations defined in the Book of the Covenant, and then we'll consider what the command reveals to us about the character of God. And then finish by talking about how it applies to believers today in light of the New Testament and what it has to say about the subject. And so by the time we're through, you might need to change your understanding or at least maybe remember the right understanding of what's mine, what's yours, and what belongs to God. So first then the limitation. And it's simple. It's no stealing. Back in 2001, I visited one of the countries that had been part of the Soviet Union. And as we traveled to different villages, we saw these massive farms and factories that were just abandoned. I mean, they had all previously been owned and operated by the government, not individuals or companies. And so people generally didn't have the freedom to start a business or even to pursue a career of their own choosing. They were assigned a job and they were forced to work for minimal pay. But when the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, people just sort of stopped working. No one took initiative or responsibility. Farms and factories were just all abandoned and fell into disrepair because no one had the money to maintain them. And even though the area had great natural resources, people were just left in poverty. And so the issues of ownership and personal responsibility are tremendously important ideas for society. And they're so important that the Lord chose to address them, I think, even in the Ten Commandments. By setting that limitation of no stealing, the Eighth Commandment stretches much farther. It prohibits much more than just simple theft. And I think we'll see the various stipulations that the Lord gave the people of Israel in the Book of the Covenant to apply that commandment, establish a clear foundation for property ownership and for personal responsibility within Israel. Now, as I've said before, my goal in this study is to cover all the verses in this part of Exodus and to link them to the commandments that they're tied to. But there are, like I said, there are a lot related to the Eighth Commandment. So we're going to need to move quickly through them this morning. We'll be reading a lot of verses. Now, the passage that is most directly linked to the commandment explains the penalties for stealing. Now, some ancient cultures, and even cultures today, might execute someone for stealing. But the Lord only required capital punishment for stealing a person, for kidnapping. We talked about that from Exodus 21:16 when we were talking about the Sixth Commandment, the prohibition of murder. But for now, we want to focus on Exodus 22, verses 1 through 4. It describes the penalty for stealing livestock. So we're coming back to our friend the ox, if you remember him. Exodus 22, starting in verse 1, it says, "If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double." So the main idea here is that those who were guilty of stealing were responsible to restore what was taken and to provide additional compensation. It was sort of a fee. And so as we learned in our study of the Sixth Commandment, like we read in verse 2 there, that the victim of the theft could respond with lethal force in the dark of night, but not during the day. And so the idea is during the day, the thief could be caught. If the thief still had the animal in his possession, then he was required to return it and to give the victim another animal of the same, right? 2 for 1. But if the stolen animal was dead or gone, then the thief had to restore oxen at a rate of 5 to 1 and sheep at a rate of 4 to 1. Now, and then if he was unable to pay, interestingly, he was sold into slavery to pay off his debt. Now remember, that was a temporary thing for the people of Israel. So think about it. Rather than just being locked away in some sort of prison, he would be put to work under the oversight of a master. Now, this principle of restitution also applied to other situations that we wouldn't normally think of as stealing. So, for instance, when men got into a fight where someone was seriously hurt, the man who caused the injury was responsible to compensate the victim for the time that he lost when he was unable to work. Exodus 21:18 through 19 says, "When men quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and the man does not die but takes to his bed, then if the man rises again and walks outdoors with his staff, he who struck him shall be clear. Only he shall pay," here it is, "for the loss of his time, and shall have him thoroughly healed." Now, restitution was also required in cases of negligence that resulted in the death of an animal. Exodus 21:33 through 36. Stick with me. "When a man opens a pit, or when a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restoration. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead beast shall be his." Verses 35, "When one man's ox butts another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and share its price, and the dead beast also they shall share. Or if it's known that the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has not kept it in, he shall repay ox for ox, and the dead beast shall be his." So you get the flow of this, right? This sense of being responsible, in this case, for even what your animal does or any damage it caused. And that continues in Exodus 22:5 through 6. People were responsible for any damage that was done to a neighbor's crops. These verses that says, "If a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his beast loose and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best in his own field and in his own vineyard." And then it adds this, If fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that the stacked grain or the standing grain or the field is consumed, he who started the fire shall make full restitution. Finally, one more passage to read from the Book of the Covenant. Here, the Lord also addresses situations where there was a breach of trust between two people. So this is a long section, but stick with me. It's Exodus 22, 7 through 15. It says, if a man gives to his neighbor money or goods to keep safe, and it's stolen from the man's house, then if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house shall come near to God to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. Right? Did he just say it was stolen or not? And so it says, for every breach of trust, whether it's for an ox or a donkey, for a sheep, for a cloak, or for any kind of lost thing of which one says, this is it, the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. And then it says this, again, going back to the livestock, if a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep safe, and it dies or it's injured or is driven away without anyone seeing it, an oath by the Lord shall be between them both to see whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. The owner shall accept the oath, and he shall not make restitution. But if it's stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it's torn by beasts, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn. And then it says, if a man borrows anything of his neighbor, and it's injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. If the owner was with it, he shall not make restitution. If it was hired, it came for its hiring fee. Now, admittedly, these are not the most spiritually edifying passages in the Bible, and you don't have to know all the ins and outs of Israelite law with livestock, but they do impress upon us, and I hope this is what you can take away from hearing all those, that the Lord really made a big deal about property ownership and personal responsibility for the people of Israel. Right? By setting that limitation of no stealing, the Eighth Commandment is pointing the way toward this very high standard of respect for personal property. But why does God care about that? Why is it so important to him? What does this reveal about the Lord? Well, that's really what we need to look at next. I think it reveals that the Lord is owner. Think about it for a moment. What is it that gives someone right of ownership over something? I mean, the common expression is possession is 9/10 of the law, right? But there are other factors to consider when someone creates a product or a work of art or even just a valuable idea. It's considered to be theirs. We talk about intellectual property, right? And that rationale, that way of thinking helps us understand that the Lord is the ultimate owner of everything that exists. David makes that argument in the opening of Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. He says, the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world, and those who dwell therein. Why? For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. So since God spoke creation into existence and shaped it according to his design, it's his work of art. You are his work of art. And he owns it all. It's all his. And so, for instance, we buy and sell land, but it still belongs to the Lord. Our ownership of it is only temporary. He reminded the people of Israel at that point in Leviticus 25:33 by saying, the land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me. Back during the time when the people of Israel were still in Egypt, when the plague of hail struck the Egyptians, Moses declared that the Lord's ownership over the earth was demonstrated by his control of the weather. Exodus 9:29 tells us, Moses said to him, he was speaking to the Pharaoh, "As soon as I have gone out of the city, I will stretch out my hands to the Lord. The thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail, so that you may know that the earth is the Lord's." So he controls the weather, right? Even the snow this morning. He controls the land. Psalm 50, verses 10 through 11, talks about even the animals belong to him. He says, "For every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine." And so most important of all, we have to see that every human being belongs to him. And some doubly so. When God saves someone, think about this, it's like he's purchasing something that already belongs to him. Right? So he's got double rights of ownership. And the Lord talks about that even as he begins to establish this covenant with Israel in Exodus 19. We looked at it earlier, but he says, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine." Right? It's all his. But when he saves someone, then it's even more so his treasured possession. And yet, even though everything belongs to the Lord, he allows us as human beings to experience ownership, right? Because we're made in his image. I think that's part of what the Genesis 1:26 is getting at when it talks about the Lord giving people dominion. Genesis 1:26 says, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Now, dominion is certainly more than ownership, but I think that's part of it. And so this experience that we have of owning something and of bearing the responsibility for it, that gives us the opportunity to reflect the character of the true owner, right? The character of God. We've already seen previously the Lord's special concern for sojourners, for widows and orphans, but he's also particularly concerned about those who are poor. Now, it's interesting to think about because every Israelite, when they entered the Promised Land, was given an inheritance of land. In a sense, they started out on somewhat of an even par, but with the circumstances of life in a fallen world, someone could still end up destitute. Right? Now, maybe it was because they were lazy. Proverbs talks about that. Maybe they made poor choices. Maybe it was just experiences outside of their control, sickness or drought or attack from other nations. And so in the book of the covenant here, the Lord addressed practical issues in lending money to someone who is poor. Exodus 22, 25 through 27, there the Lord says, "If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a money lender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him." Then it says, "If ever you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. In what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear." Catch this last phrase, "for I am compassionate." the owner of all things, allows all of us who are made in his image to experience ownership, but he wants us to reflect his compassion as we do that. It means he'll hold us accountable for how we manage the resources that he gives. Right? So even though, in a sense, we're owners, we're really servants, we're stewards. Right? Jesus uses that analogy on several occasions. Like the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. He talks about a master entrusting various sums to his different servants and then returning and calling them to give an account of what they had earned. Right? Those who did well were rewarded, entered into his kingdom. The one who buried his master's money was cast out. At least in that passage, Jesus was illustrating the judgment that will take place when he returns to establish his kingdom. So the rewards and punishments ultimately relate to eternity. He addresses the same topic in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus called people to use money in a way that will carry over into eternal blessing, eternal significance. Matthew 6, 19 through 21 tells us that he said, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So how do we live that way? How do we live as good stewards? How do we store up treasure in heaven? What is the heart of this Eighth Commandment and all the things that we've looked at? Well, I would sum up the application as generosity. When we think about treasure, we tend to picture it as locked up in a chest, hoarded somewhere, hidden away, maybe buried in a secret location, right? At least that's how it's described in all the pirate tales. Or in modern terms, we might think of a bank vault. But that's not even accurate, really, anymore. I mean, modern money is just a number on a computer. But we see it in tangible terms in land, in homes, and cars, other possessions. And so as we just read, all those earthly things can lose their value, right? They are corruptible. They depreciate. They can be stolen. And yet, we have to confess that the pull is so strong for us to treasure those things. I mean, even if you don't have a lot of them, it's still what we want, what we strive for. I mean, we're not faithful stewards. Our heavenly treasure is minimal at best. In fact, when we ignore the Lord, when we kind of live our lives apart from him, in a sense, we're stealing from him the glory and praise that he deserves. But Jesus came to change our spiritual, financial standing. In 2 Corinthians 8, verse 9, Paul put it this way. He said, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, by his poverty, might become rich." I mean, salvation is often pictured in financial terms. As Paul says here, through his incarnation, Jesus embraced the poverty of life in a fallen world. Through his perfect obedience, he earned a spiritual fortune. But then he was put to death, right, on a cross, interestingly enough, between two thieves. And what did he do? He paid the debt that we incurred through our sins. And so when we believe in him, the fortune of his righteousness is credited to our account. We're only saved through his abundant generosity. So as recipients of his grace, we must respond to that by showing generosity to others. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at about how we store up treasure in heaven. That was Paul's point here in 2 Corinthians. He was encouraging the believers in Corinth to help meet the needs of believers in Jerusalem who were struggling. In the next chapter, chapter 9, verses 7 through 8, Paul says, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. So salvation should lead us to do good works, to meet urgent needs. And as Paul talks about it there, we should do so trusting that God will provide what we need. Now, at times he can provide in miraculous ways, but I don't think that's necessarily what Paul had in mind. His normal method of providing for us is through the work that we do. Right? And Paul makes that point over in Ephesians 4:28, and he ties this all back to the Eighth Commandment. It's kind of the perfect link here. He says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing hard work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Right? I mean, that's the whole spectrum of what we're talking about here. And so what that means is that for us as believers, we should have this fundamentally different outlook on money and possessions compared to the rest of the world. The pursuit of wealth should not consume our lives. We have to see it from this standpoint of eternity. We should use it to reflect God's saving grace and the transformation that it's produced in our lives. We should use it to support the spread of the gospel. So in 1 Timothy 6, verse 17 through 19, one final passage this morning, Paul says, I'll back it up one more. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. And he says, they're to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. So where's your treasure? Are you living for eternity? How are you using the wealth, the resources of this world? Do we reflect the loving and gracious generosity of Christ? So the Eighth Commandment points us down a different path from the world around us. Right? The limitation of no stealing establishes these ideas of ownership and personal responsibility, but it also leads us to see the Lord as the owner of all things and ourselves as stewards, right? Servants, using his resources for his purposes. Our failure in doing that has left us spiritually poor and destitute, but Christ generously offers us the riches of salvation. And so in response, we should live for him, working hard, earning resources to meet needs for his glory. So do you see yourself as a servant of the Lord? I mean, have you acknowledged that your failure to honor him? If you haven't done so, I encourage you to do that today. To receive the gift of salvation, to begin to serve the Lord. And as you consider that, I encourage you to keep learning from God's word. Matthew 6 would be a great place to read more about this spiritual view of wealth that we gather from the New Testament, the Old Testament? And if you're a believer, do you need to change your view of ownership? Do you really think of everything that you have as belonging to the Lord? Are you being a good steward of it? Are you doing good works? Are you seeking to meet needs? Think about it. What could you do differently this week that would store up treasure in heaven in response to what Christ has done for it? May we abound in good works for the glory of God.